Hello, Bonnie.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm glad to meet you. I see some painting things in the background.
Oh yeah. Look, at least you can't see the state of my studio from this zoomed in distance.
Right.
Your studio looks beautifully tidy.
Yeah, it's sort of used as a living room, salon, workspace.
I
I
I
just don't know how to answer what I'm to expect of Australia. I mean, I expect very good things because I know Australians, and it's all very, very positive experience with Australians. And of course, we know a lot about Australia from the internet and movies, so I expect good things, but it's the usual things too, some of them, and some of them are unusual because I'll be meeting a whole community of artists, which is great. So I'm looking forward to that. And Melbourne looks like a nice city. I had looked at a few pictures of it yesterday. And I noticed also that Byron Bay uh, is about 1,200 kilometers north.
yeah, that's the
Of
thing with Australia is everything is so stretched.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in Australia for about 18 years. I'm South African. I've
Oh,
still got a South African accent. So it's this isn't a Aussie accent. Anyway,
right.
um, okay, oh,
The Afrikaans.
beautiful. Yeah, I do speak Afrikaans, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll start by saying welcome, Michael, to Visionary Art TV. It's great to have
Thank
you
you.
here with us.
Thank
How's
you. Thank
Vienna today?
Well, Vienna is overcast and somewhat cold, but not as cold as it should be at this time of year. And it's a very moody place to be. So,
Oh wow, Australia, I mean Melbourne is scorching hot one day and then freezing cold the next day. So that's
oh,
something you're going to have to get used to when you get here. So
okay. So I'll need a coat. I'll need a coat actually.
you need both, take it on, take it off,
Okay.
take it on.
Good.
I mean, yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
So, just when are you coming to Australia?
Well, this hasn't been cleared yet because the I don't want to come just for the 9 days or more that I'll be teaching. I want to spend a little time there, maybe 5 extra days. So I'm going to have to talk to Katya about that, about if there are requests to have longer or to have yet another workshop, then I'll be able to do that. I have something very unique to offer in the way of having been my father's son, but also having learned a lot of things from other people and by myself that diverge very, very much from the way my father painted. So I have all this. I've accumulated a lot of knowledge about different ways to approach painting, and so I think I I could I would have many courses I could give. Also, etching, sculpting, all these things. So I would hope that if there's interest in Australia, that I could come back once every 2 years or once every year and do courses there.
Michael, your studio there looks amazing. Can you tell us about it and show us round a little bit?
Sure. The studio was built in 1908 by a painter. His name was Franz Rumpler. He was a professor in the Academy of Fine Arts. And he actually was also one of Egon Schiele's professors. And I was told that Egon Schiele came up into the studio on occasion to visit with Professor Rumpler. The studio is, I don't, well, yeah, it's about 12 yards long. Do you have the metric system or the English system?
We have the metric system.
Oh, okay, great. So it's 12 meters long. It's 9 meters wide, and it's 4.7 meters high, and it has a huge window. The window is about 24 square meters, and it's not interrupted by any columns or anything. And I have had it painted a warm gray so that the light of the paintings can have a stronger effect. A hardwood floor, and it's because the light comes from the northeast. It's perfect. It's almost perfect. Perfect would be from the north, but the light comes from the northeast, and so I've done the greatest. I've been here since 1985, and I've done most of my artwork here.
Is it near where you live?
I live in the same house.
Okay, oh,
We
beautiful.
have four levels. We have four levels to the house, and two of them are used for working. One of them is a basement, but that has windows, and the other one is a loft that we built in the attic. And so I work on this one level. Is the whole level is a studio, and then and my wife's studio is in the apartment where we live. And she says I'm too hyperactive to work with. How can I work around you?
So your wife's an artist as well.
Oh yeah, my wife, my son, my daughter. This house is so full of artwork. It's incredible. It's like a museum, really.
That's amazing. Well, Michael, I was just wondering, what is your favorite subject matter and why?
Okay, now my favorite subject matter has varied over the years. There was a time when I painted a lot of religious subject matter, because I had commissions from the church, and it's not my greatest. It's the thing that fascinates me the most, but it's not the subject matter that I have the greatest talent for. My son has a much greater talent for painting religious subject matter, Christian, so illustrating the gospel and those things. And so it varied over landscapes. And basically now, what I mainly portray is the beauty of women. And the vast majority, well, not the vast, but a great majority of my painting is just to paint the beauty that women represent in their physical and in their spiritual dimension, in both.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And that's also so timeless.
It's
So,
timeless. Things are very simple. The concept, I'll show you around, and you can see some of them in the internet. And then, so yes, the beauty of women. And then, of course, I have my ballpoint pen drawings that I started in 2014. I'm on my 10th book now, which means I have about 700 or 800 drawings in this manner. And this, of course, the subject matter of beauty enters into these. But this is sort of me catching up a little with the fantastic realism. This is really fantasy work. And I put a book together with 150 reproductions of these drawings. And here you could say anything goes. All the subject matter that's always fascinated me, whether that be religious subject matter or fantastic realism, landscape, very important for me, and also the subject matter of feminine beauty. This all comes together in these ballpoint pen drawings. But I've also been very fascinated with still lifes. I don't have any because I sold them all. And then, of course, portraiture is very, very important. Portraiture is very fascinating because
and
nothing fascinates
yep,
more than a human being.
that's so true. And they say artists that are interested in people are often better artists. Um, anyway, where did you learn to paint and draw?
I first learned how to draw with my mother, who was also a graphic artist. And I also started to paint. And then my father visited me in Los Angeles, where I was growing up with my mother and her husband. And then I really started to paint. And basically, my father, Ernst Fuchs, got me started with painting. He taught me a way of paint. He did not have a very methodical way of teaching how to paint, but he did show me certain key, he opened up certain key issues for me, and I pursued them. But then I soon started to go off in my own direction, which was not fantastic realism. I was fascinated by his work, but I was not very interested in painting that way. I went into romantic, like I went into painting landscapes like Caspar David Friedrich and doing natural still lives. So I was inclined more to paint in the Baroque manner, and throughout the years, I totally departed into that. I remember showing my father a good reproduction of a portrait that I had done in the mid 70s. And he looked at it and he said to his wife, I could never have done this. And but this was portrait art standard for the 19th century. Really standard. This was nothing out of the way genius or technically genius or pictorially genius. And it was simply because that is just a completely different gift. I think I have a different gift than he. I got my gift from him and my mother, but it's a different gift. So I learned certain rudimentary things with him, especially through a painting I did of a vase, of an Art Nouveau vase that he tutored me through. And that was basically, but it did start with my father. Yes. What I admired greatly about my father was his untiring work ethic. The man had a work ethic. This is incredible, because he painted everything with these little cross hatchings, but he did huge paintings, and he did so many of them, sculpting and all the rest of it. And this is something that I learned, and I already had a good work ethic from America, and I had been doing odd jobs since I was 12, 13-year-olds. I always liked to work, but with my father, this untiring application to the arts, incredible. That's, I think, the most valuable thing I got from him. And the other thing I learned that was even more important than the technicalities of painting, what I got from him was a way of thinking, what we would say, connecting the dots. He could see, he was like Oswald Spengler in this way. He could see something happening, he could read about something happening in China 1,000 years ago, and immediately connect it to something that's going on now in Austria. A similarity, whether it was something from the financial world or from the world of art. He saw a connection. He could connect anything in the cosmos to other things in the cosmos. And I learned that through him, and also through Oswald Spengler and St. Augustine. These great scholars were great scholars because they knew how to connect things. And this was very, very important for me, also for the painting.
So, because your father was known as the father of visionary art, and obviously, I mean, it's amazing how painting just rewires a person's brain and ways of thinking, and how it reflects in other things as well. Like, as you say, him connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear these little stories of your father, because he's, obviously so well known and so revered in the art world. So, and that's just amazing. Um, so now he received a lot of attention for his mish technique, painting
Yeah.
style techniques.
Yeah.
Now, do you paint much in that style, or not style, method, or what is your preferred approach?
Okay, so this is where my gift diverges from my father's gift. I need to have a free-flowing method of painting where the movement of the hand is not impeded by a maul stick, or with a little brush. I have to paint in a broader manner to get the composition and the movement of light that I want. So I'm more influenced by the Baroque, and there's no underpainting. And if there is underpainting, it's done with oil and not with tempera white. I don't like to wait for things to dry. I don't like to apply things with little cross hatches. I like to paint surfaces and not line so that the painting becomes more painterly. So I departed almost immediately from the Mish technique that he was teaching, and I went into heightening in white with oil and then just painting into the white while it was still wet, so that I used the wet in wet. Also, I found out that certain things he was teaching at that time were experiments that he was doing and not the painting of the late Gothic age. So a lot of things that he brought into the technique were idiosyncratic. They could only apply to what he was doing or to anything that's done in that vein. And since I departed from that, I had to get my own painting technique. So I don't paint with the egg tempera anymore. Sometimes I do heighten with white, though. I think that's very, and sometimes I even let that oil uh, uh, underpainting dry and glaze over it. But I don't work with glazes a lot anymore, unless the thing that I'm painting requires a glazy effect. For instance, if you take a glass of red wine or a glass of tea and you put it in front of a white paper, obviously you're going to have to glaze the tea or the wine because it is a glaze, right? It's glazing over the white paper. You see the white paper glowing through the red wine or the rosé, and that's a glaze. So to get glazy effects that you have in nature, you have to glaze. You'd have to do this painting water, but most things don't have this, so I paint opaque, well, or semi-opaque. So the Mish technique is something that I found really impedes the free movement. And a big issue I had was a very naturalistic movement of bodies, of fabric, of clouds, water, trees. You can't really, I can't illustrate this for you now, but you can't really paint a long hair like this. You have to do it like this. Then you get the effect of flowing hair or flowing silk or flowing water or the dance-like movements of the limbs. It's because everything is flowing in nature. And you cut up the flowing nature by building things up incrementally with little elements of strokes instead of broader strokes. And so that influences, of course, how you will apply paint to a canvas, and that's the technique, of course.
I'm very interested to know what your opinion is on the contemporary art world.
Okay, the contemporary art world is divided into two camps. I'm offering you a generalization in black and white. Okay, there is a concept called the Great Leap Forward that we experienced in the mid '60s in China. The Great Leap Forward. This was called the cultural warfare, and we have this in Europe and in America too. Whereas you have two great strains of art. You have a dehumanizing one, and you have a strain of art that seeks to portray the dignity of mankind, of each individual. Now, on the one hand, you have the dehumanization of art with destructive ways of painting that people can't relate to, and this is generally what they call modern art. But you also saw it with socialist art, with communist art, and with Nazi art, that they did have a realistic portrayal of the human being, but it was the human being who gave up his personality and was subservient to the state. So that was propagandistic. What I'm trying to say is that there are strains of art that seek to relate the beauty, the truth, and the goodness in mankind, which is the kind of art that I pursue. And there is another form of art which seeks to dehumanize him. This could be capitalism gone astray, turning people into consumers. This could be socialism or communism, which seeks to make out of people a number, a statistic. They do not seek the truth of the human being, which is that he has a spirit, and that we were created in the image of God. That means we can love and we can know. We can know ourselves, we can know each other, we can know God, and we can love each other and ourselves and God. And there are forms of art that negate that. And my opinion is that, and I recognize this in work that generally either just bores me or that really repulses me. And so I know immediately what I'm looking at. And I know also that there are degrees of this too. It's not, any given work of art is not completely holy or saintly or good, and no work of art is completely evil. But there is this separation between a form of art, music, dance, whatever, that seeks to bring out the best in us and to show the beauty of nature and the beauty of mankind. Also to show things that must be shown, to show the horror of war or the desolation of famine. I'm not saying that you shouldn't portray bad things, but you should portray evil or bad things that happen to us, war, famine, and so on. You should portray it in such a way that the viewer of the painting can see that this is something wrong. And maybe even give somebody an answer to how to overcome these things. And the answer would be, for instance, peace, love, knowledge. And so I've definitely chosen a side that I am a side of this way of making art that because I like people. I don't, you know this yourself as a woman. You know in what ways women have been represented in art. They've been represented in very beautiful and dignified fashion, and also in not so beautiful and dignified. And with beauty, I don't mean just the physical beauty. I also mean the spiritual beauty of the woman. And the same thing with men and with children and with animals, even with animals. So I tend to be on the side of paintings that show love for the creation. And because the creator created all things out of love. And that's, yeah.
And also, do you think skill in painting is an issue?
Oh, it's a huge issue. A huge issue. Now, we know more than any other generation before us what skill goes into the creation of DNA. We can go to YouTube and look at a visualization, an animation of what is going on in a human cell. It's more complicated than a city. That's really skill. Because the more you love, the more you want to show your love, and the more skill you put into that. You can see the skill that's involved with the fine-tuning of the solar system. We can see it much better than Leonardo could see it. Not even, I mean, our scientific knowledge of the universe grows. It doubles, I think, every 4 years. Every 4 years, we know twice as much as we knew 4 years ago. So the universe was conceived and put into existence with extreme skill. I mean, it's just incredible. And I don't see why. And I see the direct correlation between the principle of love, skill, and beauty. There is no beauty without skill, and that's why skill is a preeminent issue in art. Preeminent. There's no way of getting around it. And all of the great works of art that we love and admire, whether it's the cantatas of Bach or the sculptings of Michelangelo, all these things were executed with great skill. And so, yes, I do believe that the more skill you have, the better artist you will be. But of course, there is also the component of the spirituality of the painting.
Now, Yep. In your opinion, and I know this is kind of I don't know, a lot of people have their own opinions on this, but what do you think is the difference between visionary art, fantastic realism, and surrealism?
Oh yeah, that's a difficult question because these things have been given different meanings by different people. I think fantastic realism is even a problematic description because if you look at the five founders of the Viennese school of fantastic realism, realism, you will find that their works are very, very different, and the realism that's portrayed in them varies in its realism. The only real realists of those five original painters, which would be Brauer, Lenden, Hutter, Fuchs, and Hausner, the only real realists among them were Hausner and Fuchs. And even Hausner was even more even more of a realist in a way. And so it's difficult. I think that surrealism was something that grew in the tens and the 20s of the 20th century, grew out of the scientific discoveries of the age and out of psychoanalysis. So it has something that's more related to certain strains of philosophy from Jean-Paul Sartre, and then of course the Tiefenpsychologie of Sigmund Freud. So I think that surrealism would be more related to what they were finding out about relativity and quantum theory, psychology, and what I mentioned before, psychology and nihilism or relativism also in philosophy. So it was more about protest against the order of the 19th century. When you get into fantastic realism, they're starting already to find their way back to the classical forms of art. Also, Salvador Dali is. So Salvador Dali starts out as a surrealist, and he develops into a visionary painting in the sense of Hieronymus Bosch. And that's where then Fuchs and company pick it up. So with the fantastic realism of the Viennese school, you're going back to the old masters, whereas surrealism itself was a kind of departure from the old masters. And the other one was visionary. Visionary art, that is a very, very broad description of anything that can come out of the imagination of any given painter, coupled with enough realism to make the vision comprehensible. So if I just paint anything, or I can't paint anything properly, I can't even paint a tree or a mountain or a cat or a person, I'm not going to be able to represent the idea, the vision I had in my mind. So there has to be a certain amount of realism to show visionary art. But visionary art you could also call it, as Bridget Marlin calls it, the art of the imagination. And so that's but generally I think we think of visionary art as being the second generation fantastic realism. So now you have Fuchs's pupils like D.S. Schwertberg or myself, and then you have the pupils of these pupils, and we're involved in visionary art. And that's sort of like a further development. And it's also, I think, in many aspects related to what they call the New Age. Yeah, I think you see a lot of that. And that comes from a certain, that is also an expression of a certain, I mean, my father was Catholic, but he was heterodox in the sense that he was interested in very many different kinds of religious systems and spiritual systems. And there was this, the occult had this, not in an evil way, but what we do, arcane knowledge tugged at his curiosity. Let's put it that way. Now I've departed from that, or I never was there. My concept of art has always been almost simplistic. If you paint a jug with a beautiful flower in it and you do it so exquisitely and the light is so perfect and it just comes alive, that's enough for me. It could be one single rose on a painting. For me, the vision starts with nature itself, because nature is, after all, the artwork of the greatest mind. And maybe this is something that I can offer the visionary community too, in as much as it's not as known or prevalent, is to show, and that's what I emphasize in my courses also. I try to teach painters to see nature, but also to know what nature really is. It is already a vision. It's already a miracle. So, and it's the miracle of the greatest. We paint a tree with oil on canvas, but a tree is actually something that lives, grows. It makes noises. Millions and billions of creatures live in that tree. You know, it's so obviously there's a skill in this tree. It's a cosmos in itself that we can never have just by painting a tree. You know, it's nature just supersedes us in every way. So I try to get my pupils into nature study and into appreciating nature also as a work of art.
So there's greatness and complexity in simplicity.
Yes.
You know, and I suppose with the Buddhist philosophy of the silence, you know, that's where all of spirit and creation is found, even in the simplicity of silence.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
are there unwritten principles of art that make some works more engaging than others?
Oh, yes. Yes. And there's one word you can put it into one word, and that word is light. Okay, light. Whether you're painting, it doesn't matter what you're painting, but you are always painting light. You are always painting light. Without it, you can't paint. Now, all we have is pigment. Pigment is not light. I like to think that in heaven we will paint with light, and it won't even be this photon light. It will be uncreated light. But that's another dimension. But what we have to have in our paintings to, you know how you go into a museum and there's a face there, or there's a painting there, and this is what you're talking about, a painting that really compels us to look at it. This would be a Rembrandt. You know, this would be a Rembrandt where all the light is coming here and it's just bursting forth, you know. And so I think, yeah, and this is also a very, very important part of my seminars, is to impress upon the participants the importance of light, and that the painting will not have any life unless it has light, and then it will have a life of its own. You know, and then you'll hang it on a gray wall. I'll talk to you about the importance of gray with paintings hanging over, and it will have its own light source. It will emanate light, and it will compel the viewer to look at that and to enjoy it and to be attached to it. And so it doesn't matter what you paint. You could paint a rusty old carburetor. You could rip out an old motor of a refrigerator and toss it into a heap of dust. And if you paint that if you direct the light, you have to work like a director. You have to, or like a conductor. You have to conduct that light in a way that moves the eye around the painting and shows the viewer what is the most important part of the painting, what are the subordinate parts of the painting. That's the next thing. The other rule, and that I think is written, is that you do have to concentrate your efforts in a painting. You can't paint everything equal. Now, a young painter, a very, very gifted woman, who put the same hard edge on all of the contours for a painting, said, well, you know, this is the way God sees it. God has everything in focus simultaneously. And that's very true. That would be an argument for painting everything equally. But the other argument is that we don't do that, and that we do need a certain kind of guidance. So I think I think an unwritten rule is all, I've never seen it anywhere, is to direct a painting like you would a play or like a ballet. Move the light where you need it, direct one movement in the painting to another part of the painting, like the Baroque. And the greatest painters of light and composition and movement were the Baroque masters. And from the Baroque age, that went downhill. And if we go to a museum in Melbourne, I'll be glad to show you exactly how these things were directed. Another thing that's very interesting is the use of cast shadow to depict distances between objects. So if you can imagine somebody leaning on a wall, his casted shadow on the wall would be touching him. It would be directly next to him. It would be darker and harder than a cast shadow from the second person in the painting who is standing more in the fore and is further away from the wall. You would see a fuzzier cast shadow on the wall of that second person. And so it becomes a way of indicating distances in a painting. This is something that's not taught anymore, that I like to teach. But maybe we'll be able to go through some of that when I'm in Melbourne.
Yeah, because Katja is organizing a couple of tours with you around the galleries as well, for you to talk about some of the work. So if anyone's interested in that, just back to your Australian trip, where do people go to sign up or show interest in your upcoming courses in Australia?
Well, they obviously they could contact you or Katja, and they can also write me an email.
Okay.
And the email address is mf@michael-fuchs.com, and then I'll just relay that to. I'll forward that to Katja.
Okay, beautiful.
And I think I have this on my website as well, and so they'll have a link to that on my website. Yeah, it's in March 2019.
Okay, yeah, so it's perfect. So they just need a general idea.
Another thing that was very important in Baroque painting, and that you hardly see in paintings today, is two people looking at each other in a painting or touching each other. We have been so atomized, so isolated from one another that, and it requires great skill to paint interactions between people or people and animals. You rarely see that, and that's also a kind of an unwritten law, and I like to get people to know this more and more, that a painting, and I noticed this by groups of paintings that I've done, nobody was looking at each other, and then I painted it in such a way that two people were looking at each other, and one of the 7 persons was looking at the viewer of the painting, and a life entered into that painting that it didn't have before. So this is also something I like to talk about. Or if you're painting 10 people, how many hands should you paint? Should there be at least 20 hands in it? Or at least 7 complete hands? You know, these kinds of things. And not everybody you should not see the full face of all the 10 people, but some you should see from behind, some you should see in profile for variation. So the whole idea of variation in painting has to be learned. It's part of the skill.
And also, art's obviously such a reflection of society today. With you, when you say people aren't connecting properly, they're not looking at each other in the paintings. You know, people are connecting via social media or whatever. Not so much personal interaction as much, in my opinion. So Michael, you've been teaching for decades. What do you enjoy the most about teaching?
The thing I like people, and I like to help people out. And so I enjoy helping somebody to get to their potential. I think that's the love was defined by Thomas Aquinas as willing the good of the other. In other words, in the moment that I say, here's this guy, I really hope he has a successful day. Or he told me he's going on a trip, hey, I wish you all the best. This is an act of love. And this is what I wish for for the people who come to learn how to paint with me. I wish to help them to get to their full potential as artists. This is the main goal. And that's what I enjoy most, is when I see people really making progress. In order to do this, I have to be honest with them, right? And sometimes the learning process is painful because, and it certainly was for me, you realize that you have certain deficiencies that depresses you. Then you try to overcome them. You find out that's very difficult. This will take years. And so I always say it's important to have fun when you paint, but it's more important to experience joy in the final product. In other words, I must be willing to sacrifice something of my get out of my comfort zone in order to achieve something greater in art. And but then to experience true joy, because true joy is something inside, it's something deep in the soul, and fun is something on the surface. Fun is good and it's fun, but it's not joy. And so that's also a motive of mine to teach, is to, and I've experienced this, when people just are happy and joyful that they discovered, well, they could actually do this, and I had a method that helped them to accomplish their goals, and also to help people to find out what their goal is. Because a lot of people have a feeling they want to do something, they want to paint, but they don't really know what their goal is in that painting. And that was a problem I had as a young painter. I didn't even know why I was doing portraiture. I was making a living from it. That's fine, but that's not enough, right? And then I started to follow my theology, and yes, there was something great mystery in the creation of man, and that made man worthy of being painted. So people come and say, hey, Mr. Fuchs, would you paint my portrait? But I don't know. I don't really have a good face. Now, maybe they're fishing for compliments. I don't know. But I always say that there's a theological, philosophical principle, and that is, if you possess the dignity to exist, you definitely possess the dignity to be painted. And this was an Aristotelian principle. He departed from Plato in this sense, that he said, if something exists, it possesses the dignity of existence, and it and therefore it is worthy to be investigated, and that's what we call science. I don't see a big separation between science and art either. That's been separated in the last centuries through the Age of Enlightenment. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that is awesome. There's obviously no such thing as you can't answer it incorrectly or whatever. Um, okay, well, now, was there any final thing you wanted to say to the viewers before? Where can people see more of your work?
Well, they can see more of my work basically on my website. I'm not being they can see everything that I wish to show on my website, and they can see some of my poetry there, and this one sculpting which I've done, some architectural design. So it's basically on my website, everything. I'm looking very forward to coming to Australia, and it's also, for me, it's an adventure. I've never been there, and I know several Australians here in Austria, so I have I have a good feeling of what's awaiting, and so I hope that will be a success. I'll meet a lot of people, and as far as the painting is concerned, yeah, I think I should say one more thing about my method. I teach a definite method. I teach certain, what I would consider almost laws of painting, like what I mentioned before about light. But I also love to take somebody where they are and help them to where they want to go with what they're doing. So it's sort of like a combination of giving people objective, almost absolute principles of painting, but also reacting to their subjective wishes and their very personalized way of expression. And that's actually a very important thing for me to do because if we all just painted from one vision or from one technique, art would be a very boring thing in the end, wouldn't it? So I think that's important to give everybody a sense of universal laws of painting, but also individualistic laws of painting. And I don't think I have anything else to say right
Michael, thank you so much for sharing your
now. Thank you.
ideas and your art with us on Visionary Art
Thank you.
TV.
Thank
And
you.
we all are looking very much forward to meeting you when you come to Australia.
Thank you.